and welcome back to Ask a Newsworker. In this video, we're going to talk about the news and mental health. Listening to the news, watching the news, reading the news can have an effect on a person's mental health. I think we can all agree upon that. Doesn't matter if you're working in the news business or just being a citizen, a news consumer, working in the news, taking it in any form can be harmful to one's mental health at times. There are adverse effects to reading about the news, seeing what's going on. The news is almost uniformly negative in some ways. So a lot of what makes its way through the news is troubling or unsettling in some way. As a news worker, I'm exposed to a lot of very sad, depressing, negative information, and it certainly has had an impact upon my mental health at times. I've gotten better over the years. The more I've done it, I've found techniques and tools and tricks to cope with the difficulty of that, but it can be very taxing on the mind, I would say, to consume a lot of news. And one question I want to put out there for anyone watching the video, anyone coming across this channel, is the question of how much news should a person consume in general? I've found this to be an interesting question. I've put it to some of my colleagues and coworkers at times, and they sometimes don't know what to say. They feel a little conflicted. They want to support the news business. They want people to read and watch and listen to and consume as much news as possible, while also understanding that they wouldn't want to do that themselves and not feeling entirely comfortable and recommending that. I mean, it's kind of like a person who owns an ice cream company. You know, they want people to eat a lot of ice cream. They want high sales of their ice cream products, but they might not feel ethically comfortable saying, yeah, you should eat 4 to 5 tubs of ice cream a day. That would be really good for us. So there's a similar thing going on. I'm not going to compare the news to the consumption of ice cream per se. I kind of did, but I know that's not a very strict and accurate comparison in many ways. But I would say that excessive consumption of maybe anything can be harmful at a certain point, or anything that is deemed excessive, I would say, can be harmful. And when do we reach that point? When do we reach the point of excess? When is something considered excessive? When should we stop watching the news? When should we stop reading the news? When should we stop listening to the news? I would not advocate people stop altogether. I do think it's important for an informed citizenry to maintain itself, thusly to keep watching and reading and listening and having a general idea of what's going on. But I do think that there should be personal limits put in place on an individual level, a point at which a person says, I think I've seen enough for today. I think I've read enough. I think I've heard enough. I think I should move on to do other things. Because even though I'm a news worker and even though I work in the news business, I personally don't feel ethically or morally right in telling people to consume as much news as possible, say, all day long. There might be people in the news business who feel that way. Network television in particular wants people to stay on the channel as long as possible, stay on the network, stay on the website, whatever. I personally can't endorse that view. I think that's harmful to mental health and to even societal health at a certain point. I think there's great value in backing away from the news and just reflecting upon it, discussing with other people, or just thinking about it on your own, writing about it, reflecting on it privately. I don't think that people should just be consuming news constantly all day long, week in, week out. I do think a break is required. But there is that question of how much is too much, and should we feel guilty not looking at the news as often as perhaps we should, and who defines what we should be watching or consuming in general? What is should in this case? How do we define the proper ideal amount of news consumption? How does one come to that conclusion? I'm not entirely sure. I put it to you, the audience. I put it to you, the internet, to give me your thoughts on that sort of thing. But my own take is that there needs to be a point in which a person steps away from the news and ignores it for at least a little while. I don't particularly know how long that would be, but I do think there is value in stepping away from the news and not consuming it excessively over and over again. especially because a lot of it gets repetitive. A lot of it is not necessarily adding anything to one's life in terms of knowledge or wisdom. There's a lot of news that is just information that isn't especially relevant to every single person's life. It's just a kind of blast of information that's going across the board, and not everything is going to apply to each individual that it reaches. You know, box office movie stories, for example, might be relevant to people who really care about how well movies are doing financially, but to a lot of people that doesn't really do much to change their lives or personal well-being. I would say the news is best when it's contributing to a person's enlightenment, understanding, and overall maybe well-being in the world. Past that point, I'm not sure what its value really is. And again, I say that as a person who works in the news business. I know that might sound strange because I'm basically saying that the very thing I help create shouldn't be consumed to excess. But again, maybe the ice cream comparison is more relevant than I was giving it credit for. Maybe there is something there. I do think that every product or service should be consumed in measure, with care, not to excess. I think there is a point of excess at which one is perhaps doing harm, or if not doing harm, then not helping. I do think there's a point where watching or consuming the news, just to cover all the verbs, consuming the news past a certain point may not really help a person that much, may not even really help society that much, especially because the nature of the news is multifaceted, and not every single message that is running through the news as a messaging system is 100% valuable and essential to every single person it reaches. But that's another video. For the sake of this video, I just wanted to talk about the mental health aspect of news consumption to get that conversation started, and just to ask you as a viewer, what do you think the ideal amount of news consumption is? Should a person stop at some point? When is that point arrived at? When is that? And how does one determine that? So that's what I will leave you with for this particular video. News consumption in appropriate amounts therein. And we will continue this discussion of everything news here on Ask a News Worker. Thanks again for watching.